Murray and I are going to present Introduction to Application Area. Murray is the current co-chair of the APPSAWG working group, and I'm a former area director and former co-chair of the APPSAWG working group.
Oh, wrong button. There we go. Oh. Sorry, I have a very small view here. One second. Okay. Oh. One moment. It's figuring it out again. There we go. So here are the 5 main topics we're going to cover. Basic overview of what the area is about, how we relate to other areas within the 7 other areas within the IETF. What are the main topics that we cover? And that can get into some detail. The Applications Area Directorate, which you may or may not have run into already if you have moved a document through the IETF before, and sort of an overview or a run through of our currently active working groups. So what's the area about? The applications area deals essentially with applications that live entirely or mostly in user space. They are things that are not the network or part of the network. And that includes the IP layer, the transport layer, routing, and all that sort of thing. Things that are not, by definition, security protocols. So we don't develop TLS, we don't develop SSL, we don't develop things that are specifically for security. There's a bit of a gray area there for working groups like UTA, which are discussing the use of security protocols in application space. We'll talk about UTA a little later. They're in the working group area summaries. So, but just to make the distinction, we don't develop security protocols in apps, but it's certainly the case that applications use them. We do not worry too much about things that are highly time sensitive, real-time things. Voice over IP does not happen in the application space, for example. And we do not develop things that are IETF procedure here. That happens in something called the general area, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes as well. We're not going to hold questions to the end, by the way. If anytime you have a question about something we're talking about, just interrupt us, and this is not any kind of formal working group meeting. So how we relate to other areas, you can see the layering essentially. Routing is at the bottom, and then internet. Imagine that's IP and then TCP on top of that, and we rely on the services that they provide for the development of applications. Security kind of runs up the side of all of that. The security area worries about things at all layers, and the general area lives on top of application space. The general area focuses mostly on IETF procedure and things that don't obviously fit into other areas. Real-time and operations and management are also live on top of. Sometimes you can look at them as sitting next to us, but not covering things that applications deals with. So how do we relate to other areas? Well, very carefully. General is imagine general covers BCPs, which are best current practices, or here's how working groups operate, here's how the ISG functions, here's how appeals work. Mechanics of the IETF that are not specific to any kind of technology generally live in the general area. We have operations and management. These are protocols that are useful for monitoring a running system. syslog is my favorite example. That sort of thing lives in the O&M area. There's some overlap with us because what they do also sits on top of all the network layers, but their audience is rather different than the audience that we tend to deal with in applications. The internet area, this is where IP and IPv6 live. I think sometimes certain parts of the DNS work, Peter, I'm glad to see you're in the room. Sometimes DNS work lives in the internet area, and some application stuff uses the DNS quite a bit. So we talk to the internet area a lot, especially about DNS. Sometimes they're very happy about things we do in apps. Sometimes they're not very happy about things we do in apps. And we have transport, which is where TCP and UDP live. They live on top of IP. Go ahead, anytime.
Yeah. Also, maybe a bit surprisingly, but peer-to-peer stuff currently lives in transport area.
Yeah.
So.
Routing, obviously, BGP, et cetera, live here. Also CIDR, the CIDR working group, which deals with secure interdomain routing, is being developed in inside routing. I've barely done any work with routing. That's why this piece of the slide is so thin. The real-time applications, some stuff that's actually technically in the layering sense is application space, lives in RAI, but theirs is all very time-sensitive stuff. So, like I used VoIP as an example before, but also instant messaging, XMPP really relies on knowing whether a person is online right now. So it tends to be more of a real-time application, the presence, especially the presence portion of it. The security area is really anything that relates to security and integrity of data in transit at any layer of the protocol stack. Of particular interest to us is encryption and authentication technologies, which all live in security. And overlaps occur. Sometimes it's not clear into which area some new work might fall. If we're starting something in apps that clearly has a lot of work in security, then there might be some debate about whether it should live in that area or this one. But in terms of the overlaps, the apps area working group is often a good place to get a glimpse of where new work is being introduced that might be of interest to apps and might also be of interest to other areas. I might mention this on a later slide, but we have a full summary of all the new working groups and all the proposed new work that's coming in, and we get good attendance from other areas that come and see our summaries. So if you're interested in seeing what's coming in at any part of the IETF, that piece of the apps area working group meeting is usually a good summary. So you want to start the SDO's part?
Yeah. Application area also have to deal quite a bit with other standardization organization, in particular OMA and W3C. Some of these interactions are more ad hoc, like for example, if another organization wants to register a header field for email or web or media type, they send requests to application area typically, and we help them out. There is quite a lot of interaction with W3C. There is a lot of shared infrastructure. A way to describe how work with W3C is split. Typically, IETF application area works on protocols like HTTP. It also works on media types, definition and URI definition, but W3C works more on formats, I would say, so like XML, HTML5. They do work on specific media, XML-based media types for, voice access and RDF and other things.
And I also mentioned OMA on this slide. I was the OMA liaison for a couple of years. OMA is a consortium of mobile companies, specifically the guys who are worried about handset software. And they come up with standards for ways that handset software should deal with certain common things. Like here's how, just to make up an example, here's how you make, if you're reading a piece of email on your handset and you want to make a spam report about a piece of email you got up to your mobile service provider, then they set the protocol by which all software on handsets are supposed to do that. So they work, it's mostly application space. They don't work down to the deep layers of SMS or anything like that. It's mostly application space that's specific to mobile handsets that OMA does. And so they need media types registered from time to time, or they'll notice that we're doing some work that's relevant to work that they are doing, and so they'll establish a liaison communication. We just got one yesterday that says, please keep us updated on progress with this document, or we need this media type created, can you please process this? which often ends with one of us going back to them and saying, here's all you have to do is fill out this form and send a piece of email. But that's the dialogue between the two that is frequent and important. What are some other ones that there are a lot of liaisons. If you go to one of the IAB pages, there are a lot of liaisons that the IETF has. These are the two that seem to come up most in the applications work. You'll hear about liaisons with the ITU. That's not necessarily application space. There's actually a lot more political than anything else. There are others you can think of?
3GPP, IEEE, but they typically...
Sometimes 3GPP, IEEE, but typically related to media types and header fields.
Media types is the most common one. So quick rundown, well, maybe not so quick, rundown of the common areas that the applications area deals with. Email is one of the oldest and biggest ones. We deal with, we sort of own SMTP, the protocols that secure SMTP, including Start TLS. IMAP and POP are the two most common protocols for extracting email from a server in order to display it. Civ is a filtering language for mail. Yeah,
typically on delivery. So, to decide what to do with the message based on header fields and body and different, time of the day and stuff.
MIME is a format for putting multimedia content in not only email but the web. It started in email, but the web uses MIME as well. All the header fields for both email and the web go through the applications area. There's a registry for them, and all the defining documents live in our space. Authentication for email is relatively recent work, as is reputation for demonstrating this piece of email really came from or appears to come from who it claims to have come from. Messaging or email abuse reporting, everything email you can think of lives up here. We also have, as Alexi was talking about, what amounts to the transport parts of the web. So HTTP, over which HTML is carried. We were just talking about this before the mics came on. HTML4 was done through the IETF, possibly because W3C hadn't been formed at the time. So HTML5 is not an RFC. You want to mention any more about that?
HTML2 was here. HTML4 was out.
Okay, HTML2 was here. 4 was outside, and 5 was out. Okay, we don't deal with HTML anymore. URI schemes are the HTTP : / The syntax for those is an RFC, and the registry of the possible schemes, which is the HTTP part of that, the registry of those is managed by the applications area. Anything else web related? Yeah, I'm getting to those. Okay, that too. You guys haven't looked at the slides yet, have you? My peanut gallery in the back.
All current and former area directors are causing troubles.
So contacts and calendars, the protocols for the formats for doing those sorts of data exchanges are developed in the applications area. This is actually so small I can't read it. Go ahead.
Yeah, some data representations. Application area deals a lot with formats, XML-based formats for particular purpose, JSON-based formats recently. Also internationalization, like email addresses, header fields, as well as language tags. So basically how to identify written or spoken or other type of language in documents. There are some other topics. Some of this might not be worked on recently, but they have been worked on in the past and they might come back. Like FTP, file transfer protocol.
Just before we go off internationalization, there's some interesting things that we need to worry about when we're expressing multinational characters. There's concerns that as we bring these things in, the ability to deceive a user becomes easier because there are a lot of ways to represent a particular letter in ways that users may or may not notice the differences. So, you might be able to say my name with a very small accent over one of the letters, and someone will think that's me, but in fact it's not. And there's a lot of concern from the abuse communities that this can increase the ability for deception to be successful. So that's something that we do pay attention to as well.
Also, letters in different languages can
Right.
look just the same, and it might be very dependent on font sizes, specific
sizes, yeah.
fonts, and
Right.
other things.
Yeah,
There is also registration directory services like LDAP. Application area worked on schema for these, also WHOIS and EPP for domain registrations.
Right. There's active development on a protocol to replace WHOIS that's happening. That we'll go through the working group summaries a little later, but that lives in our space. All the application level registries, any kind of registry for application level data, we talked about some of them already, media types, URI schemes, message header fields. Another one is MIB stuff. If you use SNMP for management, all the MIB management happens through our area. So a lot of interfacing with IANA happens. And a bunch of other lesser things that haven't had any attention lately, like fax over internet happened in the past through the applications area. Usenet and network news happened through us, and even simple things like Telnet that we've long forgotten about. Anything else?
If people want to know more about IANA, we can try to explain our interaction, and Michelle can help us out. Okay.
I think that's all.
Directorate.
Any questions on the material we cover here or don't cover here? Apps, okay. We have inside apps the Applications Area Directorate, which is a team of volunteers. We try to keep it as broad as possible across the entire apps area, and they volunteer to review documents that are they're on the path towards publication. Documents from all areas, not just applications, to make sure, as Pete would like to put it, they all have apps clue. They have considered things that are of interest to the apps area, not just whatever area they're focused on. We try to select them kind of randomly to distribute the load, but we do pay attention to what each participant is expert in when selecting reviewers. Their professional experience, their particular interests. This is done as an aid to the area directors because it's a lot to ask of them to review and consider the content of every document that's making its way toward publication. So they tend to pay attention a lot to what these reviews have to say, and it's very important that we get them. And volunteering, to encourage you to participate more, volunteering would be a really good way to start to get more involved in the mechanics of the work that we do here. Barry's heading. Not at all.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Barry Leva. I'm one of the applications area directors. I just want to get an idea of who's here looking at this. I see familiar faces, kind of wonder why, what you're looking to get out of it. But how many of you are new attendees here? So not really, it was one of you, it's not really two.
Welcome, the two of you.
Can someone just sort of shout out, are you here just to see what these guys are going to say, or are you really learning about the apps area here?
Enjoying a warm room.
I was expecting to hear about what exactly is going on in
Okay.
each of the working groups.
Good, okay,
That's
so
coming.
they're
It's
working on
coming.
that.
It's coming up.
In the back?
I still usually join the apps area all the time. So you're a typical IETF.
In the back there? Okay, great, thanks. That's what I was wanting to find out.
Anything more on the director? Okay. So now we'll go right into what you were looking for, which is a summary of what all the working groups are currently doing and what's coming up with them. I'll do this one because it's one of mine. I co-chair the Applications Area Working Group, which is a general, we use this to process work through the apps area that isn't big enough to warrant its own working group. So small projects like we need this extra media type registered or something along those lines. Larger projects are not supposed to go through here. Things that are brand new protocols, things that are large development projects are not appropriate for here. Application area directors don't always like to sponsor things because that puts a lot of burden on them to prove consensus, demonstrate consensus. So it's easier for them to move it through a working group because they can delegate some of that work to the co-chairs to do development of consensus, making sure a lot of the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed before something goes forward. We always co-locate the applications area working group meeting with the applications area general meeting. So first we have all the small projects, and then we go immediately into the areas that are of general interest to the applications area. So the first half is run by the co-chairs, the other co-chairs in the room, Salvatore. And then the second half is the area directors and whatever topics are of interest to them, more generally than just what we do. And like I said, we always present a summary of the new working groups that are starting as of this meeting, and the birds of a feather sessions that are going to happen at this meeting as well, so everybody's aware of new work coming into the IETF. The current work in this working group includes an update to the XML media types registration procedures document. There are two that have just finished. That one and another one that has just finished is an AD evaluation for some security having to do with sending mail to accounts that have changed owners recently. There's one JSON patch document that is sitting in there. We just started another one for the ability to say this domain doesn't receive mail, which has never been standardized. So you get some flavor of the work that goes through this working group. And it meets, I know that it always meets Monday mornings at 9:30. Can you talk about CORE?
Yeah, CORE stands for Constrained RESTful Environments. So basically, it's a binary protocol that semantically is quite similar to HTTP, but much easier to implement for small devices. There are certain restrictions on what you can do in HTTP, but you cannot do in CORE. They finished their base documents about format of payloads as well as the call protocol, and they're working on several extensions. One extension is for transferring big amounts of data. The base protocol is optimized for small requests and small responses, and this allows one side of the to transfer bigger chunks in data, bigger payloads in chunks. Another document is about registering interest in certain resources, sort of like subscribing to changes to the resources and being notified about what's happening to it. Next slide. Next working group is EPPEXT, which is quite a new working group. EPP is XML-based protocol for managing domains and domain-related information for registrars, like creating new domains, changing administrators, adding IP blocks, and other related things. The base set of protocols there are like 5 RFCs for move to the highest, to the full standard, to the highest possible level of standardization in IETF. And now they decided that there are several extensions they want to work on, and they want to establish a registry how to actually find and register, specify new extensions, and some extensions being worked on are listed here. To be honest, I'm not following this working group directly, so if anybody wants to add something.
I think this is its first meeting.
I think it is,
So,
yeah. Next one. HTTP-based working group had basically two major tasks. One is updating specification of HTTP 1.1, which is just a few weeks ago, or maybe a few days ago, got approved by ISG. So after, I think the original plan was to do it in 2 years. It took only 5 years, but the documents are much better as the result, actually. The other part they're working on is so-called HTTP 2.0, which is a different mapping for request response. Basically, in HTTP 1.0, client can only send a simple request and the server send the response, and then the TCP connection is closed. In HTTP HTTP 1.1, they added ability to do persistent connection. So when the client can send request, get a response, send another request on the same TCP connection, get another response, and so on. Unfortunately, there's quite a bit of latency if the client wants to send multiple requests. It either has to open multiple TCP connections, or it has to wait for the previous response to the previous request to be finished on the same connection. So HTTP 2.0, among other things, allows multiple requests being sent on the same TCP connection at the same time. So it allows for multiplexing. It allows for server to push data, which is quite of interest for some clients, but wasn't easy to implement with HTTP 1.1, and various other features. There is very active community of implementers working on HTTP 2.0. There are several implementation drafts. The main spec is sort of split into two: definition of the transport and definition of a compression for headers, which is used to convey headers for requests and responses. Major topics at the moment are discovery of HTTP 2.0 services using DNS. One proposal is to allow a server to publish multiple TCP endpoints and saying, this one supports TLS, this one doesn't, and various associated information with this. There are discussions about some specific tweaks to the compression algorithm for headers, talking about priorities and priority dependencies between multiple request and response. So this is quite interesting, quite advanced, and quite different from HTTP.
This is speedy, right?
It based on speedy,
yeah,
yes.
Right. This is probably another one you know about.
Yes, HYBI is basically the working group was chartered originally to publish WebSocket protocol, which is a protocol used by browsers to talk to the server and sort of do a lot of similar things to what I just described for HTTP 2.0, like sending multiple request responses in parallel and stuff. The base specification got published. I think there are some deployments in web browsers, but it looks like HTTP 2.0 work is actually getting more momentum. There was an extension to WebSockets for multiplexing, for sending multiple requests in parallel on the same TCP connection. And it looks like the working group is going to drop this and instead concentrate on doing WebSockets over HTTP 2.0, which provides similar capability. There is one other outstanding draft, which is compression per request, and I think that's mostly it.
Keep going.
Yeah. Yes, and that
Yeah, repeat the question.
was the main objection to objective of HYBI to define bidirectional communications between clients and servers. Yes, so it, as the name suggests, it sort of provides similar interface to TCP sockets, but with some additional features. The idea was that it will be used by web browsers in a safe environment and will allow to go through HTTP proxies and yes, provide bidirectional, so the server can send information to the client when needed. Yeah, so this document got published. No. No, that was after I stepped down. So a couple of years back.
Well, the motivation for forming the working group was to look at the general issue of bidirectional HTTP or server initiated HTTP, but specific.
And this section is being recorded, so you're outside of the thing.
I'm now on the microphone. The motivation for forming the working group was to explore bidirectional HTTP and server-initiated HTTP. But when it was chartered, the charter was specifically set up to publish the WebSocket protocol, not to look at other options. And the idea was that later, after the WebSocket protocol was published, the working group could recharter to consider other solutions, and there's no interest or energy to do that at this point. And now that HTTP 2.0 is coming along, we have been overtaken by events.
If you're curious about protocols and actually look at how features provided by both WebSockets and HTTP 2.0, the framing and capabilities are very similar, but HTTP 2.0 is actually slightly simpler and slightly more powerful to implement. So I think it was sort of, WebSockets was sort of overtaken by HTTP 2.0 at the moment. Just my personal opinion. Okay. Jake Hartkel, basically in the past, application area worked on defining iCalendar format as well as vCard format, so formats for exchanging calendaring information and for exchanging information about people and meetings and this kind of stuff. These formats are text-based, line-oriented, very email-like, and there was a lot of requests to actually, at some point there was a request to define XML version of these formats, and more recently JSON versions of these formats. So this working group defined two documents to provide equivalent mapping of vCalendar and vCard and iCalendar to JSON. One document is already published, the other one is in ISG review, I think sometimes in March, so the working group will conclude very shortly.
The JSON working group is, JSON was originally published, I believe, as an informational document, because I think that's work that's originated outside. That's a little bit before my time, or I wasn't paying attention when it happened. But JSON is now moving the JSON specification into onto the standards track with some edits along the way. The edits are, a lot of them are kind of editorial commentary type stuff and prose improvements as I described them here. Some of the examples were wrong, they're fixing those. Some of the external references need to be updated. Some of the more interesting technical changes are based mostly on how JSON has evolved since the first one was published. But so there are no big, huge changes to JSON that will make the standards track version incompatible with the informational track version, or informational version, but the point is to get it on the standards track where it really should be. Pause, I'm not terribly familiar with the inner workings of that. Are you more than me, or should I just?
You can try.
Yeah, I'll correct you.
Okay. Essentially, if you want to get some radio spectrum space to work with, you need to access a database that can tell you which pieces of the spectrum are available. So this is a protocol for, here comes Eric.
In a particular.
That's bad enough that Barry's on his way up to correct me now. Okay. You need to find the database from your handset or whatever device is making the request, and then you need to make the request to the database with appropriate security capabilities.
Right. The idea of white space is that there's spectrum allocated for broadcast use, commercial use, whatever. It's not in any particular area, not all of the spectrum is in use. And so there's the idea that you can take unused parts of the spectrum in the area that you need to use it in and request sort of a lease on it with the idea that you'll be stepped on by proper usage if it happens. Mm-hmm. And so there's discovery of the database, the authority that can allocate you bits of the spectrum, and they need to discover the database and access the database, and that's what this working group is doing.
So it's like DHCP for radio? sort of?
I think, if I understand correctly, it's also certain frequencies can be in use at certain time of the day. So it's, you know,
Yeah,
it's
location and
a location and time-based discovery of available spectrum.
Tracy.
PRECIS working group is working on framework for preparation and comparison of internationalized strings. So typical use cases are username and passwords, which are not necessarily ASCII, file names, nicknames in chat rooms, and similar type of things. The original way to do this in IETF was based on string prep algorithm, which originated from original IDN, internationalized domain name work, which was tied to a specific version of Unicode. It was tied to version of 3.2 and was defining all the characters, you know, allowed. Over years, versions of Unicode change. Different devices support different versions of Unicode. There are changes to properties of some characters, and sort of current thinking about which characters are, which properties remain the same, and which changes. Like some characters are letters, digits, you know, punctuation marks and stuff. So this working group is working on a new updated framework for helping to compare and map for cryptographic operations and other things of identifiers, usernames, passwords. The two main the problem statement document was published. The two main document, framework and mapping, are framework is past working group last call, mapping is in working group last call at the moment, and there is work on various mappings, like specific profiles of this framework.
Okay. SCIM is relatively new. I think it just met. It's meeting for the second time at this meeting. It's essentially user identity management across domains, and the ways to do that in sort of normalized ways. And all the schemas and protocols that you need to do that sort of work. I haven't tracked it beyond that. Have you got anything to add about that one? No?
I have a sarcastic comment,
Go
but
ahead.
I probably. Well, a lot of work in this space sort of overlaps historically with LDAP and schema for, you know, user accounts and groups, but a lot of new web companies don't want to use LDAP. They want, you know, JSON or XML mapping of HTTP for exchanging subset of this information. So they decided to define their own schema.
A URN, Uniform Resource Name, you've heard of URLs and URIs, I'm sure, but a URN can identify something that is not online, like a book or anything with a unique identifier. So URN BIS, by the way, this came up in conversation outside of this, as we were developing the slides. What does BIS mean? BIS is Latin for second or next, one of the two. And so whenever you see BIS, it means an update to something. So this document or this working group is updating all of the original URN specifications for modern times, I suppose. Essentially, the list that you see here, all the old documents are up for review and revision. So if URNs are of interest beyond just URLs and URIs, then this might be something you want to pay attention to. They are trying to wrap up their work without existing too much longer. They would like to shut down, but they're not quite there yet. I actually forgot to check to see which ones of these might be in last call or close to it. None yet? Okay, so they've got a ways to go. UTA.
UTA stands for Use of TLS for Applications. Its initial task is to defines best current practices, how exactly TLS should be used by email, XMPP, and HTTP. So what people found out is that a lot of aspects of use of TLS are either underspecified because they're in older documents, or things have moved on. They recommend TLS ciphers recommended many years ago are no longer recommended. There are some new security attacks discovered. So the best opinion about the best ciphers is changing. Also, like for email, there are 4 related protocols, and they were all defined in slightly different times. They specify slightly different procedure for both which cipher suits to use, how to verify services certificates and stuff. So this working group is going to produce more generalized and more consistent advice about which version of TLS should be recommended, which ciphers to use, how to verify server identity. And this working group got just chartered, and it's going to have the first meeting this Friday.
Oh yeah, Friday.
And basically, there would be a discussion about trying to select the initial documents to work on, which are in scope.
WEBSEC, you familiar with that one?
Yes. Actually, one quick word about UTA and WEBSEC, sort of. As Murray said, sometimes working groups, it's not clear whether a particular working group belongs to a particular area. So this is a case of working group which is sort of in between applications and security area. So, and similar, WEBSEC was tasked to work on web security, basically a set of specifications describing exact web security model as well as improvements. Documents published earlier was a definition of web origin concept, which is used for for cross-site scripting and different operations. It was a document published on strict transport security. HSTS is a way for the website to say, yes, you connected to me over HTTP, but I actually only talk over HTTPS. So please remember this.
And come back.
And come back and only try HTTPS. There was an informational document describing frame options is on the web when, whether a particular frame from a particular website can be included within other frames and stuff. And the latest document being worked on is key pinning. Because of recent compromises of CAs, some websites want to say that I'm going to use this particular key for this website, and if the client, client connects one time, remembers this information. If the client connects next time and finds contradicting information, it basically instructs the client not to try to connect and avoid the connection for security reasons. There is, yeah.
So on the website, what extent this work needs to be coordinated, or is being coordinated with?
The question is?
Yeah, the question was how much this work was or is coordinated with WC. Actually, quite a lot. Several of these documents started as W3C documents. I think HSTS was originally proposed there and then came to IETF, and there was a document actually. There is X-frame option, which was published as RFC, and there is a frame option, which is better replacement for it, more interoperable. This document actually got transferred to W3C out of IETF. So it's being worked there.
And how do you expect developers to understand?
Good question. Look both places. How this work relates to work in W3C, how it's being coordinated.
So I was actually going to suggest, to the extent that it's even possible, a quick summary of sort of the interactions between the IETF and
We did that before you came in the room.
well, you should have done it.
Sorry. Weirds?
Yes.
So the Weirds working group is working on the development of a protocol to finally replace WHOIS. WHOIS was developed probably in the early 80s when registries were managed. The entire registry of both network names and network numbers was maintained by one body. WHOIS has not scaled to requirements like security, internationalization, scalability, that kind of thing. So, and there's obviously a need for an improved capability to get domain and network registration information. So to modernize it, we're doing something completely different. So Weirds is developing something called RDAP, the Registry Directory Access Protocol. It's based on top of HTTP. It therefore can benefit from all the things like HTTPS and authentication and the PRECIS internationalization framework that's coming up. So it's a complete overhaul and modernization of WHOIS for the current age. Also the ability, some of the things that we have left to finish up are redirections. So one thing network registries can do is say, I don't have that information, but that guy over there probably does. The interesting thing is that network side of WHOIS can do that. Meanwhile, the domain name side of WHOIS generally doesn't know how to do that. So we're trying to figure out when the right times to do that are and how to go about doing it, what is the mechanism. Another thing is if you have a particular domain name you want to ask about or network number to ask about, how do you figure out where to direct your question in the first place? We're dealing with IANA about creating a registry for these things. What's the query protocol going to look like? We're actually interacting with W3C a little bit because they're concerned about the way we're going about indicating, building the URL to make a query. So we're touching on quite a bit of stuff here. And internationalization is also a big deal. We don't want, the homograph attacks I mentioned before are of concern, but the ability to include internationalized data in a domain name or network registry is not something WHOIS supports right now, and obviously we're long past the time where we do need that. So that's what Weirds is working on. We have 2 of our 6 documents already finished. They've been to the IESG once, but the IESG essentially came back and said, we can't evaluate 2 at a time, send us the whole batch of them. So when all 6 of them are ready, we'll send them all up at once. And we're hoping that will happen by the end of March. So that's the end of the working group summaries, or the current working group summaries. Is there any questions before we move on to BOFs that are coming up? There's only a couple of them. No. Okay. Are you more familiar with ACE, or should I do that one?
I'm not. No.
Okay.
I can sort of talk about debug.
That's what I was going to do.
Okay. Well, talk about both.
All right. So we have a couple of BOFs coming up specific to the applications area. Neither of us is terribly familiar with ACE, so this is what I've managed to figure out from their charter. ACE is interested in the access control of controlling access to devices in the whole Internet of Things idea. So you have various devices around. The Internet of Things is based on the idea that you have sensor data or very simple little devices that can give you location or status about something. The temperature inside your fridge or things of that nature. But not everything should be queryable by anybody or anything. So ACE is interested in developing ways to moderate who can query particular sensors or get that sort of information. And some of the applications for this are container monitoring, so I think that means shipping containers, that sort of thing. Home automation, talked about that. If you have a Nest in your home, that's kind of the idea. Personal health monitoring, there's fantastic talk about nanobots that are monitoring your body temperature and that stuff like that, being able to query those. Industrial control systems and the like. So who can query those things and how do you go about moderating it? Do you know any more about that?
This this is probably not very clear from the slide, but this is basically related to the core working group.
Oh, right, yes.
So they specified the base for protocol and formats to exchange, but now they're trying to figure out how to provide authentication and security between devices.
Debound is, this work keeps coming up in the applications area, and so I'm happy to see that we're looking at forming a working group about it. There is not a reliable algorithm for, given an arbitrary domain name, figure out what the registered domain name to go with it. So security.paypal.com, is that its own registered thing, or is it part of a larger domain, paypal.com? I mean, the answer to that one is obvious, but possibly not to a piece of software, given that you register things over here in org.uk and co.uk. So you can't make an assumption just based on the number of labels in the name. And if you really want to figure out who owns a particular name who owns a particular name, you can't rely on the DNS. You can't do a DNS tree walk. You can't necessarily query something like public suffix is not reliable. So finally coming up with an algorithm to do this is what I believe Debound is after.
And
is that about right? Sorry?
Yeah,
there are two current competing proposals for the ways to do this they're being discussed quite. It's not like harsh competition. They're discussing it quite amicably, but we're trying to figure out which of the two we want to move forward with, and that's what part of this BOF is going to be. Eventually, this working group is going to be working on. And I think that's all we had to present. We didn't ask for an hour and 50-minute slot, but that's what we got. So, here comes Barry.
I just wanted to say a little more about Orit's question about how we're interfacing with W3C on the WEBSEC stuff. They covered a little bit about the W3C liaison. In general, W3C liaison is one of our most successful liaison relationships. We have very good liaisons from both sides. They talk constantly. We have meetings between the area directors and the liaisons. And in particular, so that's the first level of how liaisons work. Then the next level of how they work is actual participants go across organizations. And we have W3C participants in WEBSEC, or we did when it was more active. It's kind of winding down now. And so there was always communication going back and forth between the two organizations. When we decided to move the frame options document from IETF to W3C, that's how it happened. W3C had a related working group there that was doing stuff where they thought this would fit into, and they said, you guys can put out this document, or we can fold it into the documentation we're working on in our security working group. And so we decided the right thing to do was to transfer it over there. So I'm really happy with the relationships we have with some of the other SDOs and W3C in particular. Mm-hmm. It works very smoothly.
My second question was, how do we make sure that the developers, the users, organizations actually understand what's going on and where they find out?
How can they define in which document to look for?
So the real question is, how do the people, the consumers of the documents, know where to look to find them, whether it's here or W3C or somewhere else? That's a good question. Oh, hi, Nathaniel. I didn't see you over there.
Very futuristic.
So, well, I have a meeting this week with the W3C liaison team, and I think that's a good topic for that, to come up with a roadmap. Yeah.
So that's all we have to present. There are a few people who are new to the IETF, or at least new to the area. Did you get what you wanted out of this? Is there more information you want, since you have experts at the front and back of the room who are able to answer your questions? Yes. Before we all disband and you feel lost, did you get what you needed out of this? Is there more?
Have you heard enough of acronyms which weren't explained to you?
The room is silent. Nathaniel, you all right? He's nodding.
Well, I guess I would,
Go ahead.
in general, looking forward towards what application areas can you
That's probably a better question for either Barry or Pete. The question was, looking forward, what is apps thinking about or paying attention to?
Are there any things not covered by BOF, secret things that you know about but nobody else does?
I think
The cabal, yes.
Exactly, the cabal. We've got this running joke now because there's been claims that we're a secret cabal, like the IETF is. The short answer to the question is really, that's up to you guys and the other people who will show up at 9 a.m. tomorrow to talk about it. The work that's being started, the ACE BOF, was initiated by some people who were doing the core protocol, and decided that there was more work that needed to be done there and spun off new work. Debound, similarly, there was work that needed to be done. We're getting input from people about what work needs to be done. Apps Area Working Group is picking up individual documents that people are proposing. When the question was just asked, I was sitting back with Pete, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and neither of us have any magic there of a crystal ball that says this is coming down. We just keep getting new input from people about work that they're interested in starting, and we help them get it started. There are times during the evolution of the apps area when there has been a vision of this stuff is coming, when we decided we were going to do the HTTP work, when we needed to do a lot of internationalization work, which has mostly wound down now, but you never know. One thing that I know is coming is we keep talking about doing something about the URI specification, RFC 3986, that needs updating, and we're still trying to figure out how to do that. Dave, did you have your hand up? No.
Well, I was wondering if what you're describing, if you think it's in any way different from the way other areas operate.
I think
no.
Yeah. So Dave wonders if this is any different from the way other areas operate. I think it depends, and like I said, there have been times when we've had a grand vision, and there have been times like now when we don't particularly, and I think other areas oscillate in and out of that as well. There was certainly a time when the entire routing area went into MPLS big time, and yeah, so there's all these kinds of things. Security right now has its pervasive monitoring focus, or anti-pervasive monitoring focus, and we're seeing there's a BOF.
Ad hoc meeting?
No, there's an int area BOF that's related to that now in this meeting, DNSE.
Oh, yeah.
The idea is DNSSEC covers signing the conversation with the DNS server to make sure that someone can't send you bad data, but doesn't have any address, it does not address encryption and privacy of the query or the response. And so they're looking at, with the pervasive monitoring question, whether there's something they need to do in that regard. So yeah, sometimes there are events that cause us to move in a certain direction, and sometimes it's just whatever work people are bringing to us that they're interested in working in.
If there aren't any other questions or topics you would like to cover, then thanks for coming. We would love it if you provided feedback to the edu team. Is there a specific mechanism for that? We have any forms to fill out that I know of, but what is it? Pete's looking, 1 second. But if this would be useful to repeat in the future, if there's material missing, if the format could be improved, anything like that, if anything, yeah. edu-team@ietf.org. Let them know if this was useful or not useful, or what was missing or what was great or what have you. And thank you for coming.